Greetings, Earthlings. This is your galactic gallivanter, Ashley Cass, with Cosmic Cowboy John Mata. Turn on, tune in, and drop down the rabbit hole with us as we explore the psychedelic experience, discuss tools for expansion, and speak with the most illuminated of minds. Here we go! I'd like to begin this podcast with a quote from the late Terence McKenna, intellectual, psychonaut, and advocate for the responsible use of psychedelic plants. Nature loves courage. You make the commitment and nature will respond to the commitment by removing impossible obstacles. Dream the impossible dream and the world will not grind you under. It will lift you up. Ian Benouis, a veteran and sacred plant medicine advocate working with other veterans, is doing just that. Welcome, Ian. Thank you so much for being our second guest on Down the Rabbit Hole.
Awesome. Thank you for having me, Ashley.
Let's jump right in. Through your work, what are some of the benefits you see via the psychedelic experience?
Well, I think it's ultimately a form of mindfulness and being able to get in touch with yourself. It's another tool for self-reflection and self-work. And so just as there are other avenues to get there, these plant medicines can help people on their spiritual work. And so either in concert with other spiritual technologies or more on their own, they can help people work through their traumas and have, integrated healing where they can be the people that they really want to be.
Beautiful. Can you speak to your personal experiences?
Sure. For me, I really dove deep into medicine after I got out of the Army. Before, as I was re-entering the civilian world and starting to law school, where I was taking all these medicines, these plant medicines, but I really didn't know why or what the overarching purpose was. And now I can see in retrospect, over 20 years ago, that I was healing myself, beginning the process of healing myself of these traumas that I experienced mainly in my childhood, so that I could be a decent husband and parent, And so then now I'm at a point where, after going through that process and then reconnecting with veterans 3 years ago, that's what kind of set off my second round of healing.
What are some of the healing benefits of ayahuasca?
Well, I think the healing benefits of ayahuasca are really that it can help you see yourself in a way that, that your fear and your judgment are all down-regulated, so that you can revisit things that have happened to you in your life and see them in a safe but bigger perspective where that information makes sense, so that you can basically accept it into your story. You can recontextualize it. So I think it's a great tool for mindfulness, and whether that's someone who's got the trauma that needs to be able to revisit those, to integrate those parts into themselves, or someone who's just trying to grow and maybe doesn't have that. Like my son, right before his 18th birthday, he went and joined us for ayahuasca, and he didn't have childhood trauma, but for him, he could still get benefit around expanding his circle of love and being grateful and feeling blessed and just letting stuff go. I remember he's like letting stuff go they didn't even know they had to let go. So
lots of benefit there. Do you have any insights for the potential abuse and overconsumption relating to its natural habitat of the Amazon?
Yeah, I think it's a real challenge, right? Because, we know that, commercialism delivers the product, but when the product is a beautiful plant in the healing tradition that's been going on for thousands of years, it's hard not to, instantly commercialize it. And I think ultimately you've got problems of, cultural appropriation, sort of environmental sustainability of all these people coming down there, the medicine itself. And that just tells me the problem isn't trying to force us in a model that works down there as much as we have to change our laws here so we can have avenues for the medicine, because we all know that there's other forms of this medicine that we can have grow here, kind of, North American ayahuasca that we could put together. And so there's no reason other than our own laws and our own cultural obstacles from being able to do it here. And I think otherwise, you're gonna destroy that environment there as a byproduct of us getting the healing here. And sure, you can have that sort of abuse of people just looking for the kind of, hey, instead of Disneyland this year, we're going to go down to Peru and do ayahuasca. And certainly, that doesn't really help the cause, but certainly as well, I'm not trying to judge people, for what they're doing. I think it's more that we need to both reinforce those traditions to sustain them and maintain them, because they're the ones that worked this for us and then shared this gift with us, and at the same time build our own, both cultural and legal capabilities to do it. So.
Thank you for the insight. What can psychedelics do for people who have developed unhealthy modern day habits concerning social media and online use? Pandora's box.
Well, no, this makes me think of like the drug companies where you get the drug approved for one thing and then you try to expand the things that it can be used for. So now that we've got psychedelics legal in this country, proposing to heal social media addictions, which, I'd be the first to admit that social media is the most dangerous drug that I come across in my medicine practice. I think that these medicines can be tools for usefulness, for mindfulness. They're useful as mindfulness tools. And I also know just the act and engagement of doing these medicines in a sacred practice or it's part of a practice, just like you could do with playing sports or yoga or meditation. You allow yourself to just focus on that one thing, for a certain amount of time. And we just don't have that in our society. And we are constantly surrounded in this electronic sea of all these different, social media and devices demanding our attention. And I think it's more the lesson that you can get from these medicines and that practice is mindfulness, where utilizing the power of shutting off all these distractions and focusing your concentration, on one thing. And so, I think those can help be more technologies to help people deal with that and just realize, I don't know, develop the tools to try to just navigate that and to create space where you can turn that off.
Do you have any insight for someone that is looking to have a psychedelic experience regarding setting intention or having focus or creating a space that would allow for them to dive deep?
Sure. I think that's a great question. And let's explore maybe like the difference between intention and expectation. We can say that most suffering in the world is caused because our ego creates an expectation, which is a picture or an idea or a goal. And then when reality doesn't line up with that delta is called disappointment, suffering, regret. And it's only because we've created something. And so intention is just, hey, I have this vision, I have this dream, I have something that motivates me, but it's more of a guide or a signpost or something that I'm trying to aspire to versus I have to bucket list, meet all these different criteria. And so then you're open to that. And so if you have a positive intention, that's really important in being able to help guide you towards accomplishing your work. And at the same time, I've gone into lots of medicine ceremonies with, you could say, maybe a less specific intention and just a more general one for healing. So it doesn't have to be that in this ceremony, I don't have an attachment, I'm going to lose 10 pounds and do that, but I'm going to be healthy. Well, no. You can just drop all that and say, I have an intention for healing and then the creating a sacred space. That's true in life. And even to go back, to the kind of social media thing is that we have to have boundaries and sacred spaces in our life to be able to have that opportunity for mindfulness and focus. And so a place where there aren't distractions, and the place where your phone can't ring or the text can't go off or your computer can't buzz you, where you can, and then just having that spaces where you can exercise them often enough can give you that ability to have that space in other places where there's lots of distractions.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting how the internet has allowed us to connect, and yet we become disconnected with its overuse.
Yeah, these crazy paradoxes, right? Yeah, it makes you hyper-connected, but we're more alone than ever. And so it just is really all about the quality, right? The quality of these connections. So the technology doesn't deliver the quality. It's the intention that delivers the quality, right? And if you don't have that, and you create a lot of expectations, and that's where the whole ego game comes from, and that's where all the hate and the trolling and all that stuff.
Right.
Full circle.
Dissatisfaction, never really being able to get there.
Yeah.
And so, you mentioned that you asked the question about space. When working with vets who are dealing with something that is relative, I think, to the topic of space, spatial relationships, trusting their environment, are feeling secure and they're safe in their environments. Do you find that that working through plant medicines has helped deal with that space in particular? They find themselves, having security, or any of those kinds of issues dealing with it?
Sure. I think the challenge for vets is for that safe, sacred space to exist to begin with. There has to at least be another veteran with them who has enough of that shared experience, both serving and with the medicine, to allow them to feel comfortable, because they feel that people who aren't veterans can't understand the horrors of war they've experienced, and so they feel unsafe because of that fact that they're going to act, air quotes, inappropriately. And so really the safe space for a veteran at a minimum is just that sort of sponsor or battle buddy that you would have in any kind of situation of going to medicine, right? Somebody new. But and how's this? I've worked with veterans who going through ceremony has allowed them to experience that safety that they hadn't yet previously experienced since before they went to war. And then recreating that same space outside of ceremony, and then just doing that more and more until it's bigger and bigger. So then you take that medicine space into daily space to the point where you can expand it all the way, and then they can feel safe. And I've seen that.
That's interesting. I through a 5-MEO facilitation that I was a part of, one participant their main concern was how they were going to act. They were afraid that they were going to, just let it loose. They were really concerned if they were going to find themselves back into that fight or flight kind of situation, and that was their main concern. And I tried to do everything to let them know that you're here, I've got you back. But still, I could see how in their processing, I could see how it was still affecting their release or acceptance.
Yeah, I just love how the ego shows up before people are going to take the 5 to either bargain or plead or make deals. It's so much the different person, and it's like.
And there's something about being seen. There's something, we often do as a collective. We often have been programmed to believe that if we dress a certain way or we say a certain thing, and we think about others and how they're going to perceive us before we actually are just fine being ourselves. And I think any time with medicine work, that can kick in regards to what am I going to look like to them? How am I going to act? How are they going to perceive me? So it's interesting how that ego continues even before you jump into the experience, and sometimes while you're in the experience.
A fear of understanding, or a fear of revealing your true self.
Taking off that third mask.
Yeah, I think that's what the ego is most afraid of, right? Because identifying your true self is a negation of the ego, because your true self is source. So that's, of course, the ego's afraid of that. It's like, no, I don't want to admit that. That would ruin the whole game here.
Where did all the fun go?
Yeah, but I mean, that's what ultimately it's super afraid of, right? It likes the built-in, when you boot up with your firmware, first thing running is that you're separated because you have this ego. It wants to maintain that secret.
On that theme, you stated in an interview with Psychedelic Times, quote, "My personal belief is the universe is a super organism that makes up a mirror for the divine, where the ego is a construct that creates the illusion of separateness so that we have a game to play, and it's the best game ever."
Well, that guy's kind of sometimes I want to punch that guy, but yeah. Even though that seems to sound right.
love punch.
Yeah, it's
But it does. It seems like we have come to this planet knowing our divinity, and then through programming and childhood and trauma, we forget that divinity. And then through these psychedelic experiences, we are having the ability to touch back and remember our divinity and realize, oh, this is all an illusion, and I've created this reality through my thoughts, intentions, and actions. So that resonated with me with the mirror of the divine, and we can be that reflection by being that true source, by being source. We are source.
exactly. And then it's okay if you have the experience of realizing the true nature of things, that your ego creates the separation. Then you can still go back and play your role with that beautiful, wonderful knowledge, realizing I'm energy. I can't be created or destroyed. There's no death is not absolute or eternal. So what am I afraid of? So, and I'm the only control I have is my choices. So why don't I just try to play my role to the best of my ability and see how the whole story turns out?
Word up.
Yeah. I mean, what do you got to lose?
You're limited only by your faults and your fears and your shame. So live without faults, fears, or shame, and you have your full potential.
Just do it.
I had this experience in Peru where a year ago with the veterans, do the Soldiers Divine. It was the second ceremony. I'd worked on the sexual trauma that I'd never addressed before, and took me a couple hours to for the forgiveness that I gave one of the people involved to stick, because when I said it, it didn't stick. And then I worked through it, and an hour and a half, something like that. And then sometimes I've gotten these vignettes with ayahuasca where it's like, cool, you did all that work. Now I'm going to give you a quick, little chalkboard class for 5 minutes. Like, great, kind of a little vignette. Hell, and I'm like, hell, wait, no, that's like a 14-hour series on PBS or something, right? So Mother ayahuasca was like, no, it's hell. She says, okay, the kingdom of God is within you, is inside you. When you die, that spirit, which is divine, wants to reconnect, whichever way you look at it, coming in or going out. Well, it's the same, but I had this kind of conceptualization of it. The spirit, the kingdom of God is within inside you, and then you have this wall that you've built up of fear and guilt and shame and anger and programming and all that kind of stuff. And then that's hell, because you want to reunite that spirit, but you've built this wall that you have to go through, that you actually have to process through, which we know from doing the medicine work, that's the whole goal, is to do the work as early, as soon as you can, as soon as you're ready, before it. Later, the more you push it off, the harder it is to do, because the bigger the wall is. So that's the ultimate one, where you want to do it on this plane to have that passage be as easy as as possible.
And this may be a conversation for another podcast, but going back to the idea of the game, may be one of the reasons perhaps why we design games, why we create games with layers of breaking through, of accessing, of finding and revealing, and and the game can go on and on and on as long as we continue to design it. That's just something that came to me on our ride over here. I was like, yeah, all these games, and then there's people in like mind science, who the Mind Science Organization's foundation is supporting, there's game designers out there who are dealing with PTSD.
Oh yeah, right, yeah.
All sorts of things.
Yeah, using virtual reality, right, as a way to explore. There's no difference, and that's my kind of argument. Is before we enter the holodeck and try to go to Mars and leave the planet, let's tap back into these archaic technologies that have been used sustainably in a lineage for thousands of years to master our consciousness before we try to take it off planet.
Right, because that game, that technology is beyond digital. It's beyond digital.
Wow. Well, let's jump back on track.
You might keep us in line here, Mama.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Where do you see the future of psychedelics in mainstream society, Ian?
I see them just becoming more and more accepted in some way. I always kind of wonder, first off, I knew that the drug war would come to an end when we couldn't afford to prosecute it. Obviously, cannabis is, over half the states have medical, number of states have legal, and that's, continuing to go in that direction. And I was kind of worried about psychedelics there for a while. Are they going to come in with cannabis? And now it seems very clear to me, with the opiate crisis and with depression on track to be the number one killer at current rates by 2020, that we've got this huge mental health problem, and the perfect solution for them are these plant medicines for psychedelics. So I think kind of more in the short term, it's healing the trauma and depression and unhappiness we have. And then beyond there, then it's hopefully all the good, fun growth stuff.
And you have a very interesting story on how you initially were a Blackhawk pilot, and you were part of a Operation Just Cause, with the largest effort focused directly on the war on drugs, and now you're an advocate for psychedelic plant medicines for veterans suffering from PTSD. What catalyst prompted you into activism?
Wow. So, told you, did my work back in the day over 20 years ago. 9/11 was like a lot of people. That was my just move to activism, and that was in other political spheres. And then 3 years ago, I went to the first conference here on veterans and cannabis in Texas. And I went to connect with other veterans and hear the stories, of which I knew there was PTSD and suicide and pharmaceuticals and all that. But hearing their stories, it was like a medicine to me, where I'm crying and all these things are coming out of me. And I'm like, what's going on here? I already knew, I knew of this stuff, but that connection. So that's when I realized that, veterans, that the connection is a form of medicine. And that's what then I knew that these medicines had worked for myself on a subconscious level. And so I dove back into them myself. And then I was at a conference, a movie screening for Robert Barnhart's movie, Psilocybin, A New Understanding, over 2 years ago. And I was there after the screening, and a veteran stood up, and said, I'm a veteran, I have PTSD, where can I get these sacred plants, and I'm right behind him, and like the universe tapping him on the shoulder. I was like a little kid jumping up and down, and so I connected with veterans, and then connected more, and so just we've all been supporting each other, going through the process, and so.
What do you like best about this work, and the least?
Best and the least? I mean, there's nothing better than the witnessing of someone's personal transformation in person, where you don't have an ego and investment in that. You're there supporting them, but it's all them doing their own work, their own choices, and there's nothing more powerful than that. It's like watching someone be born, like a baby being born. The worst part is probably the reality of you can't help everybody. You can't help everybody all the time, and just accepting that and being okay with that. So.
What are some of the organizations you work with, and how can they be supported?
Sure. I just recently joined my good friend Matthew Kale in Veterans for Natural Rights. We're going to actually file to become a 501c4, so the nonprofit, but with the political advocacy on behalf of veterans. And then I support Weed for Warriors Project and Veterans for Entheogenic Therapy. The former really being that frontline thing, you're coming back and you want to kill yourself, and here's to connect with other vets and get some cannabis and put that all on pause. And then Veterans for Entheogenic Therapy, helping people once they've gotten that off the kind of meds and on cannabis to be able to take the next steps to work on the trauma and, to take these other plant medicines, especially ayahuasca.
Powerful work. Thank you, Ian.
Yeah, my pleasure.
In 2016, you and a group of 6 American veterans embarked on a 10-day dieta in Peru, which was filmed and made into the movie Soldiers of the Vine. Can you tell us a little about this project and how the idea came into fruition?
Sure. So this was a year ago, last April. I was drinking with a veteran in the U.S. and a 3-day ceremony. And then 2 weeks later, I went on the invitation of Crossroads Ibogaine Treatment Center to Mexico, where I took Ibogaine and the toad, the 5-MeO. And then a week after that, I went to Peru. So what happened was, when I was offered the opportunity by Carlos to come and bring, was hoping to bring, a total of 10 veterans to Peru. When I accepted that offer, and then since I'd been in Stone Vets on Viceland, I thought, hey, this is a perfect thing where I can go to them and say, let me get the money it would cost you for us to go down there and pay for everything, and you guys kind of get a documentary in a box. And these are some of the same vets that were in your other episode, but since it didn't have cannabis, it didn't fit in. I was like, fine, I let go of that. I just knew the important thing was to do it, and of course, though, in the modern world, you need to capture it to magnify it. But I said, let go of my attachments, and I was down in Mexico for Crossroads, where I met Charles Shaw, who was doing a documentary for them. And within 5 minutes of sort of us getting to know each other, I said, do you want to come to Peru and film what we're doing? And he said yes. So he followed us down there. I went a week later to Peru. And with Casey William Hardison, another famous, drug war veteran who came down and helped out. Yeah, and then, so we can talk. I can tell you more about that as well. So.
Well, you mentioned having gone through some work with ibogaine and 5-MeO.
Yeah.
I've read recently and heard recently, particularly Annie Ortiz, give a lecture about using ibogaine and 5-MeO to deal with depression, addictions, and PTSD. Can you talk a little bit more about those two combinations specifically? Because it's something new to me. Yeah,
sure. So my kind of take is that for ibogaine, it can do three things. It can reset addictions and to the level of compulsions and disorders. So not just, let's say, quote, drug addictions, but eating disorders, sexual compulsions, whatever kind of level. Traumatic brain injury, so definitely can do brain healing, and then also the trauma release. So it can show you and contextualize and give you information about your life that you can work through your trauma. So all three of those together is what the ibogaine can do. And then I think with the toad, what it can really do is to, whether it's the ibogaine or even the ayahuasca, but it can put everything together. So it's like, okay, we've unhooked all the bad stuff, deconstructed the programs, and now we're just going to push pure energy through you and see how you do with that. And
that makes sense, because I've heard of it as like the ibogaine shows you all of your what you already know, but yet are afraid to admit is wrong, or what your issues are, and then the 5-MeO comes in like a grandmother and lets you know, like, it's okay, you can let it go. It's fine. You're gonna be all right.
Grandma comes in pretty hard.
With like a flying chancla.
Maybe so it's
potent force.
Yeah. Well, my grandmother's name was Dolores, so it really brought it pain.
But that's true. When you open up and you love grandma, then she comes super sweet. So it's just it's us who's got to adjust.
Yeah. No doubt. Oh man.
It's us who are scared of the grandma, not the other way around.
It's pure love. Pure love. What are some of the types of transformation you saw in the veterans who participated?
Well, I think I saw people who didn't have a reason to live, have a reason to live. People who'd done horrible things. It's not like you get okay with it all of a sudden. It's just more you realize there's an onion, and you're okay that there's an onion, and you start peeling back layers of it. So I would say ultimately what people got is more self-love, self-acceptance, self-forgiveness, greater understanding of their family members in relation to their own traumas and experience because of all the secondary PTSD. So, those are really the transformations where once you can start to accept yourself, and then you can start to accept and forgive all the other people in your life connected to you. So, other cultures have always in the past had means for reintegration of society, of warriors back in society, segregate them, give them rights and rituals, and we don't. And so now trying to do this through other means, it just allows people to feel like they're back in society and then still do the process of work of reintegrating, constructing their new identity, repairing their old relationships, and coming up with a new thing that they're going to do now.
On the subject of reintegrating, what does the reintegration process for these veterans and yourself included?
Yeah, it's still ongoing, right? I mean, I'd say the most important thing is a sponsor taking you to the medicine, and then that same sponsor being a resource to you, kind of like a battle buddy or same thing, just like a sponsor and other kind of programs and stuff where that you can reach out to that person if you're in a bad state. Because I remember someone, I'm sure you gotten these texts, first time, is it normal after a 3-day ayahuasca weekend to have your life in complete turmoil? It's like, oh, absolutely yes. Come on by. I'm around this afternoon if you want to talk, and then they come by and talk and no, you're not crazy. Everything's fine. And then 15 minutes later, they're on their way. But yeah, just so having that right resource when you're wondering if you're crazy. And then just other veterans, like we built when we had the project, an online Facebook chat that became part logistics, part, flight and travel coordination, part support group, part, medicine talk. And then we were having Skype calls Monday and Friday every week to start when we got back, which some of those could go hours, but, and then over time it went to once a week and then that dropped off. So just building virtual connections and platforms to be able to get together and support each other, so ultimately connection, just being able to be connected, to be there to hear and support each other.
Sounds like community is vastly important when being able to communicate with someone that has also had this experience or can relate.
Yeah, I think that idea, right, that addiction is the opposite of connection, and so even once you've done that work, you still have to provide that connection so that people don't slip back into the isolation and confusion of not being able to have other people to share and reference what's going on with them. So especially someone who's got that same perspective of being a veteran and has experience in medicine can provide that reassurance.
Speaking of medicine and the use, I've got a question of wondering do you ever see is there a point of where the practice of or the use of the plant medicine moves on beyond medicinal and moves into another realm? Maybe the use of it is for expansion rather than to heal. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I think it's a great question, and I think let's kind of touch a little bit on that of someone like my son who doesn't really have significant, trauma, and we've done this adverse childhood experience test you can do, 10 questions. So he has a 0, I have a 7, and so for him, I'm sitting there trying to fix my, life traumas, sexual trauma, car accidents, all that kind of stuff. He's looking at more from the growth perspective of like, okay, I've had a good upbringing, no trauma. How can I grow as an individual? How can I expand my circle of empathy? How can I expand my circle of love? How can I, live more authentically and fully? So yeah, I think that's where this is headed. I think that's what you're seeing, kind of the microdosing, Silicon Valley, Tim Ferriss, Paleo FX, all that kind of stuff starts to tie into the more kind of human potential growth side of it, which I think is the natural both corollary and overall evolution of it. Yeah.
Right. Using it as a rite of passage rather than as a form of healing, so that because we're going to deal with these issues for the rest of our lives, most likely we'll be dealing with something down the line, and learning how to breathe through or work through those issues now will help us out in the long run. Yeah, right.
Do you think there will be a time where we don't need these?
Yeah, isn't that a great question? I mean, I think those are all tied into sort of what's our purpose, what's our future? Is it to leave the planet? And I don't know the answers to these questions more than anyone else, but I sure know, as like being a helicopter pilot, it's like, why destroy the landing pad and put yourself in a position where you have to go versus you can go and maybe even come back and land on it. So yeah, we got to take care of Mother Earth.
Yes, most definitely. Now more than ever.
Yeah,
our home, our only home. Well, Ian, it's been such a delight being able to expand and learn more and be able to hear insights on psychedelic experience and activism relating to veterans. Thank you so much for your work. We are so grateful. And
My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Ian.
Thank
It's a
you.
pleasure meeting you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Let's do it again sometime.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Thank you.